Okay, so that is hopefully working. So formally, everyone, welcome to our weekly call. Good to have you all on. The plan this week, as the sort of title slide says, is to do a bit of a review of various of the March sort of tech conferences that we haven't really had an opportunity to talk about much. So we'll do that. I should say, as always, firstly, thank you to our sponsors, DNS. Hang on, I realised I probably need to remove, if I can, don't know if I can now actually, said the annotation that I thoughtfully made. Be a bit embarrassing if I can't work out how to do that now. So how do we do that? Can I select it? Or, yes, I can. Marvellous. Relief. Otherwise, that would have been a bit annoying to see that on every single side. So yes, thank you, DNS for being the long-term sponsors of this call. That is very much appreciated. So as I said, we're going to talk a bit about several conferences, but mainly, in fact, about IETF 125. And also a little bit about the RSA Conference, and also about the ITU Study Group 17 Content Week, and I probably will touch on as well the ICANN meeting. So a whole bunch of things that took place last month in a bit of a blur, as they were literally pretty much back to back over the course of the month, and then all somewhat inconvenient spread of time zones mainly. So we'll do that. Then we'll talk a bit about recent developments and see how we're doing for time after that. And I'm assuming, hoping, you probably ought to hope, that some of you may have comments to contribute as we go through, because otherwise you'll get very bored with my voice over the course of the next hour. So there's an incentive to have your own observations. So as promised, we'll kick off with IETF 125, which was in the middle of the month, third week of the month in Shenzhen. Had a pretty high attendance, just over 1,500 people in the end, slightly over half on site, the balance remote. So not a bad comparison to the previous meeting in Montreal, given that normally the normal pattern is the IETF meetings in Asia tend to have a sort of lower attendance. So given that trend, that's a decent number. Having said that, my observation as a remote attendee was most of the sessions I joined, the in-room attendance seemed very low. So it didn't look like there were large numbers there. I suspect many of those people were attracted to the side meetings, potentially. There were a couple of meetings which had higher attendance, but as I say, as a generalisation, it looked fairly empty rooms to me, despite nearly 800 people being present in the hotel, which ought to average out roughly 100 people per session or more. Which reminds me also, the agenda was a bit thin relative to regular IETFs, with less sessions in total than would be the norm. There's normally sort of 8 in parallel for each of typically 4 sessions per day throughout the week. That wasn't the case this time. So what I'm going to do in terms of just some observations is to roll through the agenda and making a few relatively small number of comments as observations. Welcome, Ralph, who's just joined us. So I'll do that. But as I say, as we do this, I'll do it in chronological order, obviously, as I'm following the agenda. Feel free to interrupt me with your own observations, either either on the things I've said or for things you think I've overlooked, probably because I didn't join them. Given that for us remote attendees, certainly in the UK, the start time was 1 a.m. In the morning, running through to sort of 9:30 to 10 a.m. in the morning, which was, shall we say, suboptimal for enthusiastic participation for the week. Anyway, with that caveat, from the agenda on the Sunday, the IPG had its regular 10 a.m. to 12 a.m. slot, and two presentations I sort of picked out, which I caveat with these two I haven't had a chance to watch yet because I was sort of tied up with other things, so I haven't watched recordings for these yet. But I'm sort of familiar with both topics, and the speakers, so these will be worth watching, which are Willem talking about the global local route, a topic which he and Jeff Houston and Warren Kamari, amongst others, have been promoting for a little while as an alternate way of sort of providing the route service so removing or at least reducing the reliance on physical servers. And also Jeff himself presented on DNS over IPv6, revisiting a topic that he covered a few meetings back. And there was an interim presentation by Tobias, whose surname I've forgotten, from the Planck Institute, and their respective presentations previously disagreed with each other in terms of their observed measurements, which is why I suspect Jeff chose to revisit this. But as I say, I haven't sort of watched the recording yet, but I think that will definitely be worth, both of those will be worth a look. And I will plough on unless anyone raises their virtual hand or unmutes and starts speaking. I'll put something in the chat. So if you want to break from my voice, there's your incentive. Okay, on the Monday, a couple of observations. Firstly, there were a few technical issues on the Monday morning, which didn't show up, I don't think, on the Sunday. So I'm guessing that was just down to rather larger numbers of people joining both remotely and on site, and that surfaced some, I think they were local network problems in the hotel. So the sort of first sessions, I tried to join both Dispatch and the Decentralization of the Internet Research Group, and both of them featured the same problems of very intermediate connectivity and very poor sound and video. So with that in mind, there were some interesting topics being presented for Dispatch, some of which were covered, others were kind of parked because of the technical problems, but a number that were parked, including, for example, the cross-platform policy parental controls, were not taken forward, were because the comments were made that although the sort of person pitching the idea put forward the presentation and typically an internet draft, there was no indication that anybody other than the author bought into the idea. So recognise it as a problem that needed to be solved. So consequently, they weren't necessarily rejected, but certainly weren't moved forward pending further input or further evidence that there was agreement from others that this was a problem that needed to be solved in some way. As I say, some interesting ideas, but most of them didn't pass go this time round. Now, because of the technical problems, people were offered an interim dispatch session, which I think is this week. I don't think I've missed it, but I think it's coming up this week. So some of them are being revisited. I don't know if anyone else had picked up on that. I think it's a remote interim or hybrid interim session. I think it's taking place this week. So if you're interested, you can certainly join that. And apologies in advance if I got my diary mixed up and it was last week, not this. Also, decentralization of the Internet Research Group. Again, there were some interesting sort of presentations being pitched, but again, they suffered from the same technical problems. So, although the dispatch presentations are typically sort of asked to be less than 10 minutes, there was rather more content in the DNRG ones. So they really did suffer more so from the technical challenges, which is a shame because I think they raised some quite interesting issues that warranted better exploration than was possible, given some of the technical challenges that surfaced through a sort of reasonable chunk of the available time. But there are notes on those, and they are worth a look. I'll speed up a little bit. The other sort of observation from, I think from Monday, I don't think I had any later sessions. TLS grappled with some post-quantum encryption issues isn't necessarily the right word, but they grapple with the topic of post-quantum encryption. And a couple of topics were raised during the sessions on Monday, which was subsequently revisited at length in the TLS mailing list. And by length, I do mean, I think, up to a dozen plus sort of blocks of messages a day between then and now. It's quietened down a bit, but quite significant traffic within the working group on the topic, with a lot of debate whether the current post-quantum encryption offers are sufficiently robust, given that quite a few that were put forward through NIST have subsequently been broken, and also people disputing whether it's a problem that needs to be solved yet. Rather inconveniently for the people taking that line, I think since the IETF meeting, we have had the statements from Google and others that they believe that a Q-Day, so-called Q-Day, will arrive at some point in 2029, when some of the established encryption techniques will be breakable by quantum cryptography. So there will be a need by then to move forward onto alternative encryption options, which means that we need standards pretty much now in order to get implementations up and running. So that, I'm sure that topic will run, but some very strong opinions being shared on the TLS working group mailing list, in my view, testing the boundaries, I'm being kind, of the sort of code of conduct in some cases. Sorry, there was one other one. HRPC, Human Rights Protocol Considerations, at the back end of Monday, was originally planned to be 4 presentations, ultimately only featured 3. One of them, in my view, wasn't very robust, which was the middle one, the Not an Impasse, Child Safety, Privacy and Healing Together, which was positing a view that there's too much emphasis placed on blocking CSAM, child sex abuse material, being circulated, and not enough on counselling and care and other aspects. Other things that also need to be addressed. And whilst I'd certainly agree that there could be even more investment into those things, so taking the foot off the pedal in terms of blocking the sort of known images seems to be a really bad idea. And there's a lot of pretty robust research which shows there's a direct link from viewing material to so-called contact offending. Happy to have a longer conversation about that at some other time, but I was underwhelmed with the quality of that presentation and the research behind it. And as I said, I will plough on unless anyone chooses to interrupt. Just to say, yeah, on the Tuesday morning, IETF Open, and again, series of presentations. The observation I'll make here on going into the specifics is this was at the point where the sort of AI really started to rear its head more overtly on the agenda. There was some stuff on the Monday, but more so on the Tuesday. So the IETF Open meeting being an example. But I have to say most of the AI related action was in the side meetings rather than on the main agenda, although it did crop up, as you can see from this, on the main agenda. And I think I'll come back to that in the Wednesday discussions. There was also a BOF in that same slot, which, because I was at the IETF Open, I didn't manage to attend, which was ONSEN, Operationalizing Network and Service Abstractions. So I'll mention that just in case anyone else on the call attended that and wanted to share any observations. So I'll pause there just for a second whilst I take a sip of water and see if anybody did and has any comments to make. No one's jumping in, so I'll assume not. Also on Tuesday in the measurement analysis for protocols, one of the topics was a heads up talk, measurement of systemic DNS resolver vulnerabilities. I've pulled out from the notes sort of four sort of highlights, if you like, four headlines from that, which is where the sort of different specs were reviewed. They found 90 plus vulnerabilities, 6 novel attacks with software that's been deployed across apparently 2.4 million servers. So that's a bit of a concern. One of the attacks, DNS bomb, they found that all implementations are vulnerable to that, etc. And final bullet point there, 6 drafts have been put forward to DNS Ops to address some of those vulnerabilities. And I'll just observe
some feedback on this
lines as well, that the sort of vulnerability searching and identification is becoming industrialized through the use of AI, and I think our capability to find vulnerabilities is increasingly exceeding our capability to then deal with those vulnerabilities. But I'll come back to that looking at the news headlines, but pause in the meantime, because Ralph, it looks like you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, so I watched that talk also, and one of the things that I always grapple me when I see this stuff, and they have millions of resolvers vulnerable, this kind of like includes all the open resolvers that are out there, that are home devices that are just, I mean, surely they can be abused and they will be abused for other stuff also. But I think this is a bit of a kind of like a panic. And I mean, a lot, what we also see, and that might not be visible when you're not working in that field, is that sometimes I have the feelings the attacks are getting so complicated that, I mean, sure, they are possible to execute, but I think these attacks are not for any script kiddie just to execute, because they require a huge setup, and they often don't have kind of like what I like when I read these reports, that at least when you get them in a reasonably closure stuff, that you have kind of like reproduction code or stuff or instructions how you can set up an environment and show the stuff. And for some of these attacks, they just don't have that, and that's something. Sure, they might be real, but I agree, and we've seen that a lot of attacks are kind of like getting commercialized with AI, probably easier to generate, but it's not all gloom and doom there for the DNS yet.
Yeah, hold that thought when we get to the RSA discussion. I'll give you some more doom and gloom on that one. But that'll be premature. So there'll be a pause for a second. There was a hosted social on the Tuesday evening. Well, obviously, I wasn't in Shenzhen, so I didn't experience it. But some of the comments from people that were there, it was very good. I'm not sure anyone on this call was there in person.
Yeah, I was there in person,
Oh, okay.
and it definitely was very good. I think it was so. Since I'm not sure if people attended the IETF in Orlando, where I think Comcast rented the whole Harry Potter theme park. Uh, that still is, from my experience, the best social we had, but this is probably a second.
Oh, fair enough. Oh, well, there you are then. Good to know. Hopefully, it will encourage future would potential sponsors to do likewise. Maybe VeriSign when we're in San Francisco. Hint, hint to some of the people on the call. Okay, moving on. Wednesday morning, Catalyst, coordinating agent-to-agent lists of efforts. This was, I think, an interesting idea, a non-working group forming BOF that was basically put into the agenda, I presume, by the ISG to really grasp the problem of a huge amount of discussions about AI in recent meetings, I think in particular starting from Madrid onwards, but being mainly in side meetings rather than necessarily on the main agenda. So the two co-chairs rather bravely looked across the body of stuff that had been covered, pulled out half dozen of them, which each of which got a sort of 10-minute slot to summarise what they were up to. And there were also some other contributions as well about other stuff happening both within and outside the IETF to try, if not to make sense of it, to at least draw a bit of it together. As I say, given that quite a lot of the discussions were taking place in side meetings, not on the main agenda, and quite in quite a fragmented way. So trying to sort of draw some broad themes. I don't know if the plan will be to continue that in the next meeting. I think it'd be a good idea if it did. But yeah, it was. I thought it was quite useful to see. And if you haven't caught up with that, that's certainly a recording that's worth watching when you have a moment. Continuing on the Wednesday, the IB Open, amongst other things, gave a sort of report back on a recent IB workshop on IP address geolocation and some of the regular ITF participants in sort of subsequent comments on a mailing list basically said geolocation is bad, which was entirely sort of predictable and needs to be stopped or thwarted. So I think the challenge is whilst it's imperfect, it is solving some particular problems, or at least helping to solve some particular problems. And if it's blocked or removed, those problems themselves won't go away. So it might lead to even more intrusive things being done instead to address those same challenges. So I think that topic's going to come back in further discussions, but I'm not convinced the sort of knee-jerk reaction to it is a good idea. Sorry, seeing in the chat, I missed Josh your comment about on quantum safe crypto for DNS. Yes, there is certainly work for post-quantum DNSSEC that's been covered, certainly at RIPE. I can't remember. I think it was a side meeting to the previous ITF as well, but definitely it's been covered at RIPE and elsewhere.
There was a side meeting, and there was lots of talk during the side meeting about mostly, I mean, Merkle trees and the impacts of quantum crypto on DNS servers. I mean, mostly DNS, TCP. There was one talk that wanted to talk more about the actual, overall CPU impact or the overall impact. but that talk didn't have the data ready yet. So we will probably see that in Vienna. That's at least what the authors promised. And again, there will be a side meeting in Vienna also.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ralph. And Patrick's put in the chat as well. I think DNSX seems to have added support, Empower DNS and Bind. And as I say, there were some presentations, I'm pretty sure it was at the last RIPE meeting, or maybe the one before, but or possibly both, where there have been some experiments on post-quantum in DNSSEC, amongst other things. Watch this space, I think, is the sort of comment there. But I'm just scanning through other stuff. As I say, I won't go through all of these. The plenary seemed to be generally positive, I think. I'll move on. And there wasn't so much to say on Thursday, so apologies for running through. I don't think I had a lot really to say on these sessions. So I'll just pause in case anybody else did, but otherwise I'll move on to the Friday. No one's jumping in, so I'll move on. On the Friday, the only one I'm really going to sort of just mention, the sort of second of two TLS working group sessions looked at sort of various topics. One that caught my attention was authenticated ECH config distribution and rotation, which is a presentation, I think, by one of the Cloudflare team, if I remember rightly, or where they're looking at randomized SNI settings that could be used and changed, I think, even within sessions, to avoid having a generic SNI, which is what Cloudflare currently does, which makes it easy if you want to block ECH traffic, just to look for that SNI and then just sort of block anything with the SNI. So they're potentially giving users the ability to randomize the SNI at the individual sessions. So there's not a generic top level name to look for. I feel, sort of personal view, it's starting to adopt some of the behaviors of malware when you start to have randomized labels for things that are created on the fly. I think the IETF needs to be careful on the direction of travel. Certainly some of the DNS abuse discussions in ICANN, which we'll maybe come on to later, that's an absolute issue where domain generation algorithms sort of effectively do just that, to generate sort of random names. So personally, I think that will be a mistake to head in that direction, but that's certainly a proposal that was discussed briefly in that TLS session. So that was really it from me. I just pause there in case anyone else has got anything else you want to add about the IETF meeting. As I say, sort of as a remote attendee, the agenda overall felt reasonably thin compared to normal meetings, which is maybe a blessing, because it meant it was possible to get some sleep at reasonable times of day, rather than sort of literally be up from 1 a.m. to sort of 9:30, 10 a.m. Every day for a week. So there was a blessing on one level, but it felt like there was less of substance on the main agenda than previously. That's not to say that the side meetings weren't good, but I didn't have the drive to go to those, dip into those, as well as often the remote attendance at the side meetings is not great.
I mean, being there might be a different experience, but I think I don't think you had anything on DNS up, actually pointed out, which I think had lots of interesting stuff, but of course was very DNS nerdy, so to speak. But I think one highlight there certainly is that the Notting Head filter DNS draft is, it's been renamed. It hopefully gets renamed another time. but that there will be implementation in Google Chrome for that, and that's, I think, was a very interesting point. And I mean, granted, DNS delegation. I mean, yeah, I'm the author, so I
Yeah,
think we
to be
also
fair,
achieved a lot there. So, but that's kind of like so. I think the overall experience was not as bad, especially as you could talk to people a bit easier on site that you normally can, and it was a bit nerdy, so to speak. I mean, not kind of like the big topics that you might see in other IETFs, but more where's that bit going here, and what is the corner case for a local route when you have a server in Iran that now has been out of commission for 6 weeks? If that root server comes back, what's going to serve now? I mean, this is stuff that, sure, you normally don't think about, that you could kind of like discuss there in length.
okay, so it gave more time than
Yeah.
perhaps would have to be. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. It'd be interesting also, Ralph, I guess, to see whether some of the new participants that were present in Shenzhen then sort of remain engaged onwards,
Yeah.
because certainly the percentage, the balance of participation had shifted quite markedly from the norm, which is very sort of US centric. 30% plus normally from the US in person attendance. So it'd be interesting to see if what the sort of distribution is in Vienna, for example, at the next meeting, whether the level of participation from sort of China in particular sort of remains as high, albeit I know they have.
I mean, probably not as high, but I mean, it's still probably higher than the San Francisco meeting down the year. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I was just thinking, of course, they do have visa challenges often, which makes it harder. But okay, well, let's then move on. So, since I mentioned RSA, and I'm not going to sort of dwell on this to the same extent, mainly because you can't see any of the recordings. They're behind a firewall, so it's not terribly useful to tell you about stuff you can't necessarily access. Normally, so RSA has enormous numbers. I think I mentioned this on a previous call. So last year they claimed 44,000 people in person attending a combination of the conference and the accompanying exhibition. Yeah, a good chunk of those just go to the exhibition, not the conference. But nevertheless, it's significantly larger than, say, IETF, just for the conference numbers. 644 sessions through the week. So quite a lot of content over 4 days. It felt to me, though, this year that the conference felt markedly less busy than last year. I don't think that was true so much of the expo, but certainly the conference, the numbers felt down. I haven't seen the actual official numbers, but so that might not be true. But going back to the sort of discussion we're having with Ralph earlier, whereas last year there was a lot of focus on generative AI, this year it had moved sharply on to agentic AI. That was really the overarching sort of theme of the conference. And one of the comments was helpfully, you need to be red teaming your infrastructure, or rather you have to assume that your infrastructure is being red teamed. The only decision you have to make is whether you want to get a copy of the report or not. In other words, attackers will absolutely be using agentic AI for red teaming on your infrastructure, whether you are or not. It felt from some of the comments, overall, I'd say that the balance of power through the use of agentic AI has shifted in favor of attackers, at least in the short term, with partly because they don't need to sort of test, sort of certificate the tools before they start using them, because if they don't work well, they just throw them away. So in the short term, they've got some powerful new tools which aren't really fully up to speed yet for defenders. And there were some interesting examples given. For example, there's a recent series of so-called capture the flag competitions, where a small group spun up their own sort of agentic AI-led sort of system, if you will, and it was only a couple of months old, and it placed in the top 1% across, I think, 6 competitions, which between them had about 250,000 participants. So it didn't win, but it was basically a new system that was in the top 1% on performance across 6 competitions. So that's with pretty limited training data to work with, and it was already right up there with the sort of best in class sort of human attackers, and that was with a very small budget. I think they said something like 5,000 tokens were used across the 6 competitions. So comparatively speaking, very low cost. So you could extrapolate from that, if I'm a state sort of backed attacker with a lot more means at my disposal, that would be very powerful. And again, continuing a theme from last year, concerns around shadow AI are even greater this year. That's where individual employees are, quotes, using their initiative to use their preferred tools, not sanctioned by the enterprise IT teams. And with agentic AI, the view is that's just driving huge holes in the cyber defenses of the enterprises. And the one that was mentioned specifically, OpenClaw, almost shoot at sight any employees using OpenClaw on your infrastructure. I mean, they didn't say shoot on sight, I hasten to add, but be very, very concerned if you're a CISO and find any evidence of OpenClaw. If they felt that was just an enormous breach of your likely cybersecurity. So that was kind of the theme. Obviously, a lot of detail behind that, but agentic AI it literally over the last 6 months has really sort of taken the lead on stuff. And Josh, your comment in the chat about is the balance always in favour of attackers? The view last year was perhaps a balance had shifted to defenders. So that was the sentiment. Very unscientific. This year, it felt very much it shifted in the other direction, and the agentic AI based tools were really their sort of killer app at the moment. So as a defender,
I'm not familiar with OpenClaw. Could you spend a couple of minutes and brief us on what that is?
So that's an agentic AI tool, which I haven't personally used. I should say that, and obviously I won't, because it'd be really bad if I did. But basically, I think from the discussions, it gives you, the individual user, the ability to fire up your own agents. And give them tasks on the system, including permissions to do stuff. And it seems like that can really cut across a lot of cyber policies that an enterprise may had. It was more the sort of the flavour of the month, probably about 3-4 months ago. It seems to have sort of dropped down profile-wise recently. I don't know if anyone on the call's had any personal experience with OpenClaw. Could give it a better explanation than me, but as I say, my take is it's a sort of DIY agentic AI tool to unleash on the enterprise, but without the sanction of the IT team, which is a bad idea. I'll see if I can find a good explanation for it afterwards, and give a better answer than that, Josh. I can see Ed's just posted a link, but I'll have a look round and find a more coherent explanation than I've just given you. But it was, as I say, overall, agentic AI is the thing, and seems to be helping attackers more at the moment. Okay, let me jarringly move on to ITU Study Group 17, which was in Geneva a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago, so very end of March, beginning of April. First 2 days of the week there was a workshop, trustable and interoperable digital identities for human and agentic AI. So proving my point about the theme at the moment. So very much on topic on agentic and looking at sort of the digital identities. Which I didn't go to that. I believe it was very well attended. I think, Gianpaolo, you may have been in Geneva at the start of the week and been involved in that.
Yes, yes, I was really on the topic. Now, identity is a very hot topic in standardization.
Yes, because that also came up in the IETF meeting as well. And I think that was very well attended. And then it moved on to so-called Content Week for Study Group 17, or more on cybersecurity. There were a lot less people on site for that that I saw. I was there with Tom and Gianpaolo as well. I think we saw less people in the sessions we were in, but maybe we were unpopular and no one came because we were there. That was probably it. I think there were other people around because there was, again, sessions in parallel, but it felt like it was quite useful for us to just remind everyone about our proposals around PARSEP, so parental controls, interconnectivity, and making parental controls great again could be a fun marketing slogan, which may not age well, but anyway, which we're continuing to work on. So it was good for that. Yes, sorry, Philippe.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I don't know if that's the right time to ask this question, but I saw a couple of presentations on that workshop about the use of a public naming scheme, for lack of a better word, that would use the DNS to identify AI agents. I think it was in the AI workshop that you mentioned there. I think there was a paper from was that GoDaddy? Not a paper, but an offer, I don't know, that was posted as well, which was interesting. I was wondering whether there were any work on this. I mean, concrete standards development. I saw an idea as well, an internet draft along those lines as well. So I was wondering whether you or anyone would have some notion of where that's going, because I'd be curious about the sort of the policy development or the governance element that may arise around these notions.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. So GoDaddy and Zoom Law, I think it is, have actually got a system that's live at the moment. Yeah, which appears to be underpinned by the DNS for the sort of naming, and also there are a number of proposals. I think more than one internet draft, but definitely one, because Jim Mosley from Infoblocks, amongst others, is a co-author of it, which was presented for dispatch, I think, to IETF, so in Montreal, I think, not certainly it wasn't in the last meeting. I don't know if any of Jim's colleagues are up to speed on where that is currently, but it certainly seems to be moving forward.
But that was in dispatch, because I looked up, strictly speaking, DNS related working groups, but in hindsight that would make sense to have it presented in dispatch, but I didn't look at that.
Yeah, it was in dispatch, I think, in Montreal, but I don't know if Ross was going to interject with a better recollection than me on that.
I think the first session was the one before that, and then in Montreal, and then I want to say Nick went to Shenzhen.
He did. You're right. I've forgotten that. Your colleague Nick was in Shenzhen. You're absolutely right. if you like, if that's of interest, Philippe, because it's been a sort of few months, and obviously agentic being very much the flavour of the month anyway. Shall I reach out to Jim and some of the other co-authors? We'll do an update on that because it's probably
That would be great. Yeah, if you've got a couple of pointers on the IDs in particular, which I'm not familiar with, to be honest, but I'd be curious. That'd be great. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'll give Jim a heads up that you'll be reaching out to him, Andrew.
Perfect. Thanks. Appreciate that, Ross. Yeah, I think that would be timely anyway. Given it's a hot topic at the moment, and yeah, maybe we'll try and get perhaps someone from GoDaddy. Maybe there's a few other people sort of in this general area, so perhaps we'll get one or two of those on as well and have a more general discussion. Yeah, good idea. Okay. Yeah, I can see. If I didn't say, Simon has put a comment in the chat about, not recommending OpenClaw in the corporate environment. So just sort of reiterating the warning: use with caution and use a sandbox. I think that's very well firewalled if you're going to play with it. So conscious of the time, I'll probably stop there on these things. That gives you a flavour of some of the stuff that was covered, in particular at IETF, and to a lesser extent, just more sort of thematic for RSA, and just a very tiny piece on ITU Study Group 17. I put this one up just for completeness. ICANN also 85 took place, but we covered that on a previous call. But just as a reminder, sort of key themes there was particularly around DNS abuse, and to a lesser extent the forthcoming or nearly current now new GTLD round, as well as other general governance related issues, and not very much AI that I picked up in any of the sessions I was in Mumbai. So a sort of contrast with RSA and to an extent the IETF. But yeah, we had a whole call on that not so long ago. And it was sort of heavily disrupted by sort of the sort of impact of issues with the Mideast and Iran. All right, so I'm going. Oh no, that is the right thing. So right, let's just briefly move on. Recent developments in the news then. Interesting report about blocking of sites. Report from a consultancy basically saying that site blocking in the EU is broken. We've sort of touched on this topic ourselves sort of previously. But in essence, the report basically says there's lots of issues. It's not really fixing the problem, which I think is probably true, and it recommends the banning of IP blocking. I think the issue with that specific recommendation is some of the parties that are involved in this are almost forcing the use of IP blocking by rendering all other tools useless, and then deliberately increasing the collateral damage from IP blocking. So if you then criticize the use of IP blocking because it has much wider impacts, that's by design from some of the other participants that are trying to do away with blocking completely. So I think it's more complicated than the think tank report suggests. And it's entirely unsurprising that people are going down the route of IP blocking because pretty much all the other tools are being removed from the toolkit. And there was a really fascinating report also about no safe harbour scotters. So the Supreme Court of the US scuttles the DMCA, that's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So it's a write-up of a recent court case or recent ruling by the Supreme Court where it ruled in favour of Cox Communications which is defending a case brought by Sony about copyright infringing sites and the fact that Cox wasn't blocking them Anyway, that's a complex issue. Won't go into all that, but it's a really interesting article in Circle ID and a link to a much more detailed paper by the same author if you're interested in it. And he also sort of broadens on to look at the implications for copyright in the light of AI-driven developments as well. So yeah, personally find that fascinating, worth a look. It's indirectly relevant to the sort of DNS in terms of DNS blocking, which was what Sony was wanting Cox to use, but it inadvertently opened up a whole can of other issues. Also, briefly, coincidentally, also in Circle ID, John Curran, President and CEO of ARIN, the sort of North American regional internet registry, wrote an article, it's sort of kind of in defense of the RAR system on the back of, there'd been a whole series of articles critiquing the RARs by one author who has been involved in governance battle on Afrinic and also is threatened legal action with RIPE. Anyway, so John wrote an article, Lu Heng, the author of those critiques, then wrote a reply or wrote a comment, which John then replied to. So there's a whole very lengthy exchange under the article, which if you've got a lot of time, is worth reading. They're quite sort of thoughtful posts, but in essence, Lu Heng is definitely not a fan of regional registries. Clearly, John Curran, as president and CEO of one of them, is, and I'm not sure they moved their positions a lot through, despite the lengthy exchanges. But yeah, there's a lot of comments there. The other one, just briefly, bottom of the screen, a report by CSC, which you have to register if you want to access, basically comparing and contrasting the adoption of different security-related standards by sort of the world's top 100 unicorns compared to Forbes Global 2000 companies. And amongst other things, it concludes that the unicorns are more likely to be using DMARC, DNSSEC, and SPF. Compared to Forbes Global 2000 companies, which was just an interesting observation, I thought. Plenty of other stuff in the news as always that we won't have time to go through. And then other things that caught my eye, there's a new EU age checking app. It's been sort of, not sure it's actually live yet, but has been dubbed as ready for use by the head of the Commission, and immediately criticised by others as having flaws. Also in the US, there's potentially some draft national privacy law legislation in the offering, possibly plugging a long-standing gap in the US, although a small number of states do have state-level legislation, but there's been a lack of federal legislation for some considerable time.
On the EU age verification app there, I was at the age verification summit in Manchester last week. It was announced by some chap from the EU, and there was a chap from France there saying how they were implementing it. Very interesting. Lots of age verification vendors going very, very pale in the room. But I think they were all rubbing their hands together after then a day later, people saying it's got this security flaw and that security flaw and the other security flaw, which
yes,
just seems a little bit negligent by the EU to like bang something out that maybe they let the junior dev free on.
It appears you can bypass device-based biometrics somehow, but yeah, I think it's got a way to go before it gets enthusiastic adoption. Also, just perhaps I want to finish on, there's various coverage, but basically NIST has stopped rating non-priority flaws because of the sheer volume of flaws that are being found, and possibly also because they have less budget than they used to have. But also there's an interesting write-up about, for example, Project Glasswing, which is automating the finding of them, and a whole bunch of other stuff there. In essence, it used to be difficult to find flaws, and it's becoming increasingly easy to find flaws, and the systems haven't really adjusted to reflect that yet. And to building on the sort of our early discussion, some of the agentic AI tools that are aiding attackers seem to be able to implement really obscure ways to break systems, which probably a human would never have found or be able to easily implement at scale, unless they were immensely experienced. But it seems like it's putting those tools increasingly widely available to attackers. So there's a number of stories looking at that. I just thought worth mentioning. Finally, just as we're just on the hour, if you want to put anything into Nanog, the deadline for that's coming up next week. And if you want, you've passed the deadline for RIPE sort of presentations, but it's still open for lightning talks for a couple of weeks until the 4th of May. And then, a reminder, no call next week because I'm in Manchester for the annual ICANN Contracted Parties Summit. The following week, Brent Eskridge from Infoblocks is going to be talking about the .ARPA abuse discovery that he and others wrote about, I think 2-3 weeks ago. And we've got a whole series of things after that, including the one I've highlighted, which I mentioned last week. During RIPE 92, so on the Monday at this time, we'll do a sort of hybrid in-person and remote session. So if you're in Manchester, we can do it in person, where John Todd, possibly others from the Quad 9 team, are going to be giving an update, some of the sort of stuff that they're up to. So we can do that both in person and remotely as normal. It'd be quite fun to do it in person for those of us that are in Manchester for RIPE. And then other stuff you can see on the agenda over the next few months. So hope that was useful. Apologies for running slightly over, and apologies for mainly talking at you, but lots of stuff happening, and we will have a look to see if we can get something organised on the whole agentic AI sort of naming and the DNS, and put that on the schedule for a future call. So with that, have a fantastic week as always, everyone. I'll do news headlines next week, but we won't do the call. So see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye, everyone.